And don't tread on me either.
All right, one more time, a little louder.
Hey, and don't tread on me either.
People have given up hope in this country.
What do you think we can do to give them some hope back?
It's time to start kicking ass and taking names.
Don't tread on me.
One more time.
Don't tread on me.
All right, scream it.
Don't tread on me. Wake up, America. It's time to fight for liberty.
Don't tread on me is the line. That is the line where we define who we are.
We are giving you a warning. Federal government, we are giving you a warning. Totalitarians, we are giving you a warning, statists, that we are getting to the point where we will be striking back with lethal force. And you do not want that. So you do not wish to tread on us.
Does that vilify or legitimize the concern that the federal government has about militias?
What? Kicking ass and taking names?
If we start to shoot back.
Oh, look, we can't let it get to that point. We cannot let it get to that point.
I'm sure that they've said that a million times during the Revolutionary War and the war before that and every other one that we've had, but unfortunately reality is that throughout history, tyrants don't give up their power willingly.
If the government we organize under the People's Constitution survives the next 20 years, it may go on forever. My friend, it will survive.
What are our obligations of citizenship? Number one, to understand the American way of life and what makes it tick. For instance, we should understand that our form of government is a republic, not a pure democracy.
A pure democracy establishes majority rule with a minority overrun.
Yes, it does. On the other hand, our republic is based on a constitution which protects minority rights. And it's important, too, that in our republic, authority is surrounded by an ingenious system of checks and balances that prevents autocratic or dictatorial rule. That is, if we maintain the Constitution as our basic law.
You've just come from the Constitutional Convention. What have we got? A republic or a monarchy?
A republic. If you can keep it so. You have been warned. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
When President George W. Bush was confronted over the fact that he was violating the Fourth Amendment with his warrantless wiretapping of the American people under the Patriot Act, he famously said that, well, the Constitution is just a GD piece of paper. And it is just a piece of paper unless we animate the Bill of Rights and Constitution and Declaration of Independence. If we don't exercise these rights, like muscles, they atrophy, they rot, they fall away. It is we the people that empower the Bill of Rights and Constitution. For a long time, people forgot the Bill of Rights and Constitution, and it was dying on the vine. But now we see that new life is being breathed into it, and that a revolution of freedom is burning in the minds of men and women everywhere. This is very exciting. And as a society, as a species, as a planet, we're at a crossroads. Will we have a 1984 society, or will we rediscover the true values that made us great and go back to that spirit of 1776? That's why I have said many times that the answer to 1984 is 1776.
The human sovereign, if you will, we the people. And that's what the Constitution tells us. We the people do ordain and establish this. The public officials didn't do that. The judges didn't do that. We the people did it. Well, that's a statement that we the people have the authority to do it. We are the ultimate lawgivers because the ultimate law, at least the ultimate human law in our system, is the Constitution, and we the people created it.
We the people gave birth to government. We are the masters of government, and they are the subjects of the people.
A lot of people blame the Bill of Rights and Constitution. They blame our system of government for the oppressive corruption that we're living under. It's not the fault of the Bill of Rights and Constitution. It's the fault of we the people for letting government grow into this gargantuan, sprawling system that it is. It's our fault for not holding government officials accountable, and by letting government officials call themselves officials. They are public servants. We the people constitute the government. We the people are the boss. And when the government becomes destructive of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights, it is not just our job and our right, it is our duty to remove that government.
And most of these problematic pieces of legislation and laws that get enacted are done without the people's knowledge. Some of it's even done without legislators' knowledge. And so they don't go to the people and say, hey, what do you think about having to carry an ID card around and show that card before you can travel and do all kinds of things.
The idea of constitutionality becomes kind of fuzzy when you talk at the state level because the states were intended to be autonomous. So therefore, whatever they put in their state constitution is whatever their state constitution is. For example, in Illinois, their Second Amendment, most Second Amendments just say the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Illinois state Constitution says subject to police powers, these rights shall not be infringed. So in Illinois, anti-gun laws are constitutional. In Missouri, they're not.
The bill, House Bill number 246, is an act exempting from federal regulation under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution of the United States a firearm accessory, or ammunition manufactured and retained in Montana, and providing an applicability date. So it's basically they're trying to exempt themselves from the Commerce Clause, and the Commerce Clause is what the federal government uses for everything. If
a state gets out of line,
yeah,
this is what they use to pull them back in.
Anything.
In Missouri, it just says if the firearms and ammunition are made here, what's made here and stays here is not subject to the national government's Commerce Clause. They've used this Commerce Clause to interfere with everything they choose. And it's time for us to say, no, if we make it here, it has to be stamped on the gun, made in Missouri. We're very proud of that, and that says, get your hands off.
Tonight, states are stepping up to protect their residents' Second Amendment rights from what they see as the long arm of Washington. Under a new state law starting next month, any gun made in Montana, sold to a Montana resident, and remaining in that state will be exempt from federal control.
Congress does have the power to regulate interstate commerce, but I think that was the specific intent. That is to say, the Congress has the power to regulate the way trade occurs between the states, and also to regulate the way trade occurs outside of states in commerce with other nations. But this Interstate Commerce Clause has been interpreted so broadly as to literally affect every aspect and phase of American life. That is the loophole that has been used to so dramatically broaden the application of federal power far beyond the intent of the framers of the Constitution.
But when the federal government comes in and says, we want to be your daddy, we want to tell you how to live your life, that's where we draw the line and say, whoa, not in Montana.
And the feeling among many there is that the thing to fear the most is not a person with a gun, but a government that would take that gun away.
Well, the meaning of the Second Amendment is found in its actual words: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms to not be infringed. Now, you notice that structure. If we ask what's the most important point in the Second Amendment, well, it's the object, and the object is the security of a free state. Right? And the first thing that the amendment tells us is that something called a well-regulated militia is necessary to that purpose. And the second thing it tells us is that something called the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Why? Because it's connected in some way to a well-regulated militia, which is connected directly, as the amendment tells us, to the security of a free state.
Well, the Second Amendment was written just to make sure we wouldn't have bad people come in and try and rob us of our rights. The bottom line is that's the only last hope there is if people are trying to do harm to our nation.
Well, the whole reason we have the Second Amendment in there, a lot of people understand this, but a lot of people either never do or have forgotten, it's to protect ourselves against an out-of-control government, a tyrannical government, a government that's violating the rights of the citizens and violating the law. And we have that today. We have a federal government that violates
the law.
What we're doing on the state level is playing a game of rock, paper, scissors with the national government. And if you've ever played that, you know that one can crush the other. We're trying to say we have the right, under not only the 10th Amendment, but also the 9th Amendment, to shoo them away and define this is within the realm of the state, not national government. Now they're going to whip out this Commerce Clause in Article 6 of the Constitution and say we have a right to regulate anything we feel like because it now does cross state lines. And we're ready to push back. We're going to push back, and the whole, not only the whole country, but the whole world is going to get a colossal civics lesson.
The Commerce Clause refers to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution, which gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. The Constitution enumerates certain powers for the federal government. Any powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution are reserved for the states via the 10th Amendment. It is clear that the states have had enough, and they are rising up to fight back against federal tyranny.
And no one can blame President Obama. We have only ourselves to blame because he's made it very clear, as has his Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer in the country. They just want to do a few things with gun laws, like take them away in large measure.
I think that the current administration in a year's time has moved farther and faster than the federal government has ever moved before. Now, does that mean there weren't abuses of our Constitution and the role of federal government prior to that? I don't think so. I think this has been going on for literally decades.
In my opinion, I think what has happened here is, you know, the American people tend to not really pay all that much attention to our government unless our government really overreaches its bounds. And so for years and years and years, the federal government has continued to step more and more into areas where they don't belong. They've reached their dirty little fingers into areas where they don't belong. But what they've done to the American people is they've done it, or they've served it to the American people a thimbleful at a time. They've given it to them a little bit more and a little bit more. And it looks like maybe when served a thimbleful at a time, the American people are a lot more likely to go ahead and receive it or swallow it, so to speak. What's happened now with the election of President Barack Hussein Obama and the dominant control that the Democrats have both in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, in my assessment, in my opinion, what they've done is they've decided to go ahead and just really, instead of trying to serve up their encroachments a thimbleful at a time, they're trying to serve it to the American people in 5-gallon buckets. Well, when the federal government oversteps its bounds in 5-gallon buckets, the American people wake up. And the American people have awakened. The Patriot Uprising, what some people might call the Tea Party movement, whatever you want to call it, I call it Patriot Uprising. When the Patriot Uprising occurred, it really occurred and gained steam because the American people got fed up. They got sick and tired of a federal government that constantly overreaches its bounds. The federal government tells each and every one of us how many gallons of water we can have in our toilet. Our founding fathers never intended for the federal or central government to have that much control over our lives.
The federal government has encroached upon the very fabric of our senses. With health care bills and bailout bills, and with every kind of Patriot Act bill, our nation sinks lower into the pit of gloom and depression. The American people desperately want a way out, but the federal government has other plans.
Paul, we've all learned our lesson. From now on, we'll know better than to try to fight this sort of thing ourselves. We'll go for a sheriff.
You mean from now on, the Cartwrights don't fight their own battles anymore? Is that what you're saying? From now on, whenever we get into any kind of trouble, we have to go begging for help?
Not begging, it ain't begging.
Well, then what is it if it isn't begging?
It's asking. It's asking like other folks do when their rights are violated, Paul. It's asking folks whose sworn duty it is to uphold the law to come and help us. Paul, ain't that what you always tried to teach us?
In the last 20 years, we've seen an acceleration away from our Constitution and Bill of Rights and towards absolute despotism. The John Warner Defense Authorization Act, the Patriot Acts, the warrantless wiretapping, the renditions, the secret arrest, all of this is not only anti-American and completely illegal, it is textbook tyranny. It is anathema to our system of government. The Republican and Democratic parties and the treasonous, traitorous Congress have borrowed from all of the oppressive systems across the world and amalgamated them into the current system. And they paint everything they do in this patriotic glow, and it's for America and it's for the children. No, it's for the private Federal Reserve System that's hijacked this country and that has committed all these crimes. It's for them to protect themselves from the people that they have reduced to absolute slavery.
What everybody needs to know in this country is the issue of state sovereignty. Sovereignty, or if you're a sovereign, you have no other power above you. The states are sovereign. The key issue there is, who do you think formed the federal government? It was the 13 original states. Does anybody really think that the states formed a central government that was all powerful, that could turn around and tell the states what to do? This is exactly what the Founding Fathers started the Revolutionary War to prevent. They did not want another king, as it were, to tell them what to do all the time. We fought a war against King George III tyranny. They didn't want to bestow or award the new central government with omnipotence. Quite the contrary. The Bill of Rights was designed specifically to keep the federal government in check, to keep them limited in what they could do. And the 10th Amendment basically tells the federal government, if you want to get creative, if you want to go outside your constitutional boundaries, absolutely not. If you think we forgot something, you can't do that either.
Well, basically, the government in Washington has assumed powers that it constitutionally does not have, and that were reserved, as the 10th Amendment tells us, to the states. So if you're talking about states' rights, you're really talking about the claims that the states have to exercise certain kinds of power on their own without some kind of federal interference.
If they want to stop the federal government, they have to find a vehicle. They have to find something that's couched either in law or the Constitution. And the 10th Amendment is very clear about the state's ability, the state's rights and state sovereignty in stopping and curtailing the power of the federal government. So it is the tool, the legal and constitutional tool that is being used to stop the federal government.
Well, a right is something that you have, again, inherently, something that is part of your nature, something that you own. A privilege is something that's given to you by someone or some entity that has authority over and above you, that has the ability to control you.
Let me, just for the sake of the illustration, because I do like to pull up my handy-dandy Constitution, and I don't blame anybody. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Checkmate, by the people. Number 2, the 10th Amendment clearly says that the states have the rights to pass laws so long as they don't conflict with anything already in the Constitution. There's not one word in the Constitution that says Congress can do health care.
Rights and privileges are opposites. And assuming that that is true and that there aren't other options, either you need permission or you don't, then a number of other things are also true. One of the corollaries is that all of your rights derive from property. I pointed out that if I walk out of my house onto my land, I can walk back and forth on my land without asking for permission. Walking on my land is a right. Walking on my neighbor's land, on the other hand, is a privilege. And before I walk on my neighbor's land, I'm required to get permission. It's a privilege that can be revoked at a later time.
We've got Dr. Edwin Vieira on the list. He's a constitutional scholar. He's argued cases before the Supreme Court. He's Harvard educated. He's written several books, including Constitutional Homeland Security. He is the definitive expert on the constitutional militia.
The Constitution provides that the laws shall be made by the legislative branch, carried out by the executive branch, and interpreted by a third branch of the government, the judicial branch, to make certain no law violates the Constitution.
Well, the federal structure is based on division of authority and division of responsibility. The government in Washington, D.C., let me call that the general government, because the federal government includes everything. The federal government is the government in Washington, D.C., the government in the states, the localities, and ultimately the people themselves. The general government is designed to deal with problems involving all of the states. International relations, war and peace, regulation of commerce among the several states, uniform bankruptcy legislation, coining of money so that we'll have a uniform system of money. Right? Uniformity that applies across the board. Well, what has happened is that the people in Washington, D.C. discovered that money would be a good way to gain power. And through their taxing system and their banking system, they have been able to concentrate control over money in Washington. And then they turn around to the states and say, oh, we have this program that we'd like you to participate in, and if you do, we'll fund it. And it's a wonderful control mechanism because it's based upon what? The ultimate vice, I suppose, avarice. Right? We're going to pay you to sell out your own citizens, and the state representatives have said fine, and in many instances, people who are receiving these benefits from Washington have said fine too, not realizing that those benefits are what's the picture that comes to my mind? The master puts down the food in front of the dog, and the dog is happy to get the food even though the dog has the choke collar around his neck. Right? Even though the dog is now subject to the master, it's happy to get the food.
This bill has special deals for special folks. The Louisiana Purchase, special deal for Florida, special deal for 2 states in New England, and a special deal for Connecticut. And as much as my friends like to rail on the insurance companies, they give a special deal to Michigan Blue Cross so that they don't have to get the new tax increases. Why is that? Because it's special deals for special folks. This bill is unconstitutional. Texas State Attorney General plus 40 or 30 other attorney generals will sue the federal government if this bill passes because of special deals for special folks. And also, this bill is unconstitutional because it forces the American people to buy a product. Nowhere in the Constitution does the federal government have the authority to force you to buy anything, whether it's insurance, a car, or a box of donuts.
What we have in Congress are a bunch of lobbyists who are there making sure that elected officials do the will and do the bidding of corporations. And I mean, this healthcare debate is a great example of that. I mean, the insurance industry right now, they're spending $1 million a day to convince people that they need to keep private healthcare insurance companies, and that's how we need to have our healthcare run in this country.
What does the term sovereignty mean? Well, you can have a nation that's declaring that it's sovereign from an empire or from a nation that it was previously a part of. But at its most basic level, sovereignty, or saying I am a sovereign, means I am not your property. I am not a slave. And our Declaration of Independence was unique in history, where the people created a new government and constituted it to be a protector of their basic rights and freedoms. Not democracy, not mob rule, 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, but a system where the minority as well as the majority was protected.
Bills that would protect the American people from the federally sponsored healthcare fiasco are now getting the support they need.
As we call it, the Missouri Freedom of Healthcare Choice Act. It also is a House joint resolution, and on the Senate side it's been filed as a Senate joint resolution. These resolutions are the type that would result in an amending of our Missouri Constitution. And basically, what these joint resolutions do is inscribe into our state constitution that the citizens of Missouri will not be compelled or forced by the federal government to have any type of health control mandates from the federal government. This is a brilliant piece, a beautiful piece of state sovereignty, pushback type legislation.
The main point of passing a resolution is we have to define who we are and what we will tolerate. It's their job to be the public servants. They're getting way off task.
The support from the citizens was tremendous. In my 8 years in the legislature, I've never seen so many citizens come up to the Capitol to participate in a hearing.
A properly constituted federal government exists only with the authority of the people and is only granted power from the people. The same thing is true with the various state governments. Their power derives from the consent of the governed.
We did it with the extension of unemployment benefits in Missouri this past session, where we had to jump through hoops, actually change our state statutes to be able to get those extensions. We said no. I think what's going to happen is collectively, the states are going to have to come together, and they're going to have, the legislatures of the states are going to have to say no.
Welcome back to The Ed Show. There are tough times on Main Street. Unemployment reached double digits and small businesses are struggling to stay alive.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
We kind of agree with Mal that political power comes largely from the barrel of a gun.
I'm very appreciative of the fact that Gary Franchi and William Lewis contacted me and authorized us to post this film at PrisonPlanet.tv so it could subsequently be posted all over the internet on YouTube and other channels. They spent a lot of money making this film. It's about states' rights, the difference between the republic and a democracy. This is a film that can really cause a grassroots movement in this nation to rediscover what it is to be an American and to get those checks and balances back over the federal government that only the states under the 10th and 9th Amendment can provide. And to ensure that they can make future documentary films, it's essential that you support them by going to Infowars.com or Don'tTreadOnMeMovie.com and purchasing Don't Tread on Me, Rise of the Republic on DVD with the expanded extras. Plus, you get it in the highest quality. It's great to show friends and family, to have viewing parties, to send to your legislators, your county commissioners, and to people in Congress. The future of this film is in your hands. We've done so much together in the past. I want to thank all of you for your support of independent filmmaking that stands up for this republic. Don't Tread on Me, available at Don'tTreadOnMeMovie.com or Infowars.com. Get the DVD today.
So they think they own our land, they think they own our water, they think they own our children, our education, our money. They completely control all the money supply, think that we have to pay for all their disorderly conduct and their corruption. And the truth of the matter is that none of these things are under federal control.
Legislation that puts teeth into the 10th Amendment resolution in the state of Oklahoma is known as the Federal Tax Escrow Account.
The federal tax escrow account really has two parts to it. It has first the aspect of it in which it is directing certain federal taxes to be paid to and through the state treasury, and then the state will pass that federal tax on to the federal government, the IRS will say. And let's say it's the federal income tax. People start paying their federal income tax to the state treasurer instead of the IRS, and then the state treasury will then pass it on to the federal government. So one of the proposals, and one of the proposals that we have here in Oklahoma and some other states have, is to try to get control over that ability that they have to print money, give it out, and then take it back or hold it back. So putting teeth in the 10th Amendment and in the Constitution, one of those solutions is to require those federal funds in the form of taxes, some of them or all of them, to be paid through the state into the state treasury, and then the state treasury will pass it on to the federal government, unless from time to time we determine that the federal government has committed unconstitutional acts, either directly through the use of that federal tax or in other ways. And then we can hold that money back as a protection for the citizen, as a protection for the citizen and the state.
Well, the theory is to challenge the Commerce Clause power of Congress with the 10th Amendment spin. What the bill says, is now the law in Montana, is that any firearms, ammunition, and firearms accessories made and retained in Montana are simply not subject to any federal jurisdiction under the power of Congress to regulate commerce among the states.
In addition to the federal tax escrow account, bills are popping up that put a freeze on federal taxes and pay them to the IRS based upon federal compliance to state resolutions and state legislation. These are peaceful and viable solutions to federal abuses.
The bill that I'm working on right now, and I've actually got a meeting with a member of the House Judiciary Committee next week, planned to actually look at this legislation and try to make it consistent with Kansas statute, will take federal tax receipts that are gathered on individuals in the state of Kansas and on corporations that do business in the state of Kansas, would, instead of sending those directly to the IRS, would instead send them to the Kansas Department of Revenue. What they would look at is the proportion of federal spending that satisfies enumerated powers and what percentage does not. Whatever percentage does not satisfy enumerated powers, the state of Kansas will utilize to satisfy unfunded mandates on the part of the federal government. Whatever's left over goes back to the people of Kansas.
We have the ability to tell the federal government to get out, so it's just a lot easier once you inform your state as to what the 10th Amendment is, 9th and 10th Amendment is, and how that they can say no to the federal government. Once you talk to your representatives about that, once they get educated, then they start to go, okay, there is a solution to this problem. We can do this all by ourselves as an individual state.
HJR 88 literally enumerates many of the infractions that have been made by the federal government and basically says that from the time of its enacting, from the time that our Missouri state constitution would be amended as a result of the passage and then voter approval of House Joint Resolution 88, that the state of Missouri would never again be compelled to adhere to or even recognize any law that comes from the federal government that is not constitutional.
It is a message that I hope that the General Assembly in Missouri sends to its federal delegation in Washington, D.C., saying as the elected representatives at the state level, the people that are your constituents also, that you understand, we are sending a message for you to cease and desist.
You also have a direct infringement into state sovereignty when you start talking about our monetary policy. It was left to the Congress to be able to coin money, and they delegated that responsibility out to a group of private bankers. And we see that in Article 1, Section 10, that the states are required to only accept gold and silver as legal tender. Well, when you've delegated the authority out to print money by a federal entity, well, actually it's not even a federal entity, a private entity doing so under the auspices of a federal entity, what you've done is you've basically made criminal organizations out of the states because they can't conduct their transactions in the gold and silver that they're required to under Article 1, Section 10.
In addition to state resolutions that put a freeze on federal taxes, comes an electronic gold system that would increase the gold tax base.
Well, the money bill I originally drafted was for New Hampshire, and it was based on the use of electronic gold currency, mainly because that's the cutting edge technology now. But you could, at the present time, make it gold and silver because they've expanded that technology. But what essentially did was to have the state adopt as an alternative currency this electronic gold system. And in that particular case, it was to a relatively small percentage of the state's budget, because we tied it to the tobacco tax, make it simple, and not scare people too much. We're not going to jump into the lake with both feet. We're just going to put our toes in, as it were. About 10% of the state's budget would come in gold, and then the state would offer to pay out gold to whichever its creditors, to whomever it owed money, first come, first served. We'll pay that debt in gold. Now, the thought was, I think it's fair, that pretty soon that 10% of the state's revenue in gold would be out the door. People would be lining up to get that. Then the treasurer would come back to the legislature and say, you know what happened here? Our gold stock went to zero in a matter of a month. I need to have more of the tax base turned into gold, increase the gold tax base. And if it's correct that good money will eventually prevail over bad money, you would see most of that state economy, the state spending, would be on a gold basis. And then in the private economy, well, people are receiving gold from the state and people are having to pay gold into the state for taxes. What about in the middle here? Well, now I'm going to start asking people to pay me in gold, or I'm going to start offering to pay the gold that I've received to people. And it would expand through the private economy. And the next thing you know, that state, for all intents and purposes, would be off the Federal Reserve System. Federal Reserve notes would be like a foreign currency, like euros or something. You'd only take them when you needed to deal with somebody out of that state that demanded to be paid in Federal Reserve notes. And the other state, people in other states would be looking at it and say, hey, why aren't we dealing in gold?
The federal government, the American government, is weak because it doesn't have a big army, a big navy, high taxes like a European power. And Jefferson said, no, this is exactly our strength. Americans love their government because it doesn't do anything to them. Right. But over time, as the judge was saying earlier, we've come to have this opposite model where now it seems that the government is able to decide how much you get paid, who your doctor's going to be, whether you can buy a gun, what you can, anything it wants to.
Well, if the states had as little power back then as they have today, nobody would have agreed with the Constitution. It seems like it's crept in slowly with people who started with a pure and noble desire to have a centralized government. And they've been encroaching on the rights of the states year by year, bit by bit, law by law, and nobody in the states woke up enough to say, that's too much. So what we're doing in Missouri is we're drawing the line in the sand, and we're saying, this is our territory, that is your territory. The Constitution says that this is our right. And unless we take back what was already given to us, we're not going to get any respect from them.
More than 35 states have already declared sovereignty or in the process of declaring sovereignty against the federal government. And that doesn't mean that they've seceded, as the national corporate media spins it. They're simply stating, look, federal government, you're not supposed to be involved in local education. You're not supposed to be involved in local environmental rules. You're not supposed to be involved running and controlling our local police departments.
Jefferson makes a point that he actually took from Locke. He says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So there's the key to it, that people can put up with a lot, and probably they should put up with a lot of friction in the system, simply because the alternative of overthrowing a government with everything that entails is potentially so horrendous that we don't want to get involved in that. But when it reaches the stage that you can look at what's going on and say, well, this is just a series of usurpations, abuses, which are leading inexorably to this result, then it is not simply one's right, it is your duty to take this kind of action.
The American people have read the Bill of Rights, they've read the Constitution, they've read their state Bill of Rights and Constitutions, and they figured out everything the federal government is doing is illegal and out of control and wrong. And so we're in the right. Not just in the right, it's our duty to stand up and say no and declare states' rights under the 9th and 10th Amendment that is enshrined in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution.
The Declaration of Independence talks about the proper role of government. And right after it talks about the unalienable rights that we were blessed with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it states what government is for. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. And that's the bottom line. We are here to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If your federal government isn't doing that, then the people, as the Declaration of Independence says, the people have the right and the duty to throw off such government and establish new guards for the future of our security and happiness.
It is altogether fitting this be done.
If you don't know what the Constitution says, there's no way you can uphold it.
It's the Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners, and it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom. But management's lousing up everything.
Labor is at fault. It's ruining the country.
My constituents, as your elected representative, I can assure you Labor's right. Management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor, management, politicians, phooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
What?
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ism.
George Washington said that government is not reason. Government is not eloquence. It is force. And like fire, is a dangerous servant and a fearful master.
Thomas Jefferson stated very succinctly, he said that the natural governing state of man is not total freedom. It is not liberty as enshrined in the Constitution. If you look at the history of civilizations across the ages, the vast majority, I'd say 90% of civilizations have been governed by an autocratic entity, an emperor, a king.
Doesn't matter where it is written or even if it is written. You know, you need to understand the difference between rights and privileges. A right is inherent. I can sit here and I can think anything I want. You can make a law that makes it illegal, you know, to think about circles. And I can sit here and just think round, 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 and I can just continue to break the law, and there's no way that anybody can know if I'm breaking the law, and there's no way that anybody can prevent me even if they know that I'm breaking the law.
If you don't know what the Constitution says, there's no way that you can uphold it. And what we have today are people in very high power places of power that are laughing at people who bring up the Constitution.
I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest.
That's my, well, that's right.
Jackpot, brother. Oh, keep.
I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest.
The entity, i.e. the Congress, who has the responsibility under Article 1, Section 8 for our money and our monetary policy, if something goes wrong with it, they can't point the finger at somebody they delegated the job to. It's still their responsibility, and they need to take ownership for it. And we saw in the in the healthcare debate, we saw the legislators coming home and being held very directly politically accountable for their positions on healthcare, and that is the type of thing that these guys are trying to avoid.
Healthcare, the Department of Education, usurping the National Guard and the state militias for federal bidding, passing laws governing interstate commerce that have nothing to do with interstate commerce. Having a standing army is unconstitutional, if you read it correctly. The Constitution provides for a navy, and that's it. The founders understood that the way we won the Revolutionary War was not through a large standing army, but the militias, and they understood that was the proper way to defend a republic, was through militias. The only thing you need a standing army for is offensive military action.
And so suddenly when the American people realized that the Congress, both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, had become entirely unresponsive to the people, I think that made the people mad. I think people finally realized, hey, this is our government, this is our nation, and we're going to take it back. And I think that's what gave birth to the Patriot Uprising and Tea Party movement.
If we were to look at a list of violations of the Constitution, the federal government You could look at the Department of Education. You could look at the Department of Energy. You could look at recently the bailouts that have been passed. The federal government does not have the right to just print up money and bail out companies, no matter who they are, whether it's financial service companies or automakers or anyone else, and obligate the taxpayer.
I do believe that the people of Missouri will overwhelmingly approve House Joint Resolution 88. If and when that happens, I'm sure that the federal government, the overreaching hand of the federal government, is going to sweep in and try to tell us that we've done something that we're not allowed to do. The bottom line is, sooner or later, there's going to have to be a showdown.
In the building behind me, we have a Health Care Act introduced by Senator Jane Cunningham and Representative Tim Jones, that it's a constitutional amendment for the state of Missouri, and if it is passed, and we firmly believe that it will be passed, it will throw up a wall to the federal government and essentially give the people of Missouri a choice of participating in the federal law if it's passed or not.
That's precisely one of the reasons that I've crafted Senate Bill 587 to permit the people, if they choose, to establish a commission wherein the state can review federal actions and seek a redress of grievances in federal court where the state finds that there is a federal infringement.
In appropriations last week, I asked Revenue, what does the federal government give the state of Missouri as far as percentage for us collecting the federal gas tax? And they said, nothing, Senator. And I said, so we collect that and we send them a check. Do they pay for the stamp, on the envelope for the check that we sent them? No.
So when people speak of the word revolution, it does not always necessarily mean a violent overthrow of a government.
No, but unfortunately, throughout history, we've seen that happen over and over again.
That seems to be the overwhelming consensus, but a revolution can take place between the ears, as a friend of mine once said.
I think that's why the Department of Homeland Security is so concerned with militia members, demonizing militia members. They know that these people are educated on these topics.
I think that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is only a list of things that the government can do. It is not a list of what the people can do. And that's very clear from what the founders, the framers of the Constitution intended. It certainly is not a list of the things that we can do. It may include some of those things, and it does, but it's not a list of the things that we can do.
Taught in our schools today is that there are two kinds of government. They're what they call positive government and negative government. You have positive rights and negative rights. Well, what's the difference? What they talk about, and I've got textbooks that say this, that the United States in the Constitution offers negative rights. And what they mean by that is that the Constitution starts out saying government shall not. And what it means is that in this country, government is supposed to be under control of the people, it's supposed to be limited, and we have very definite ideas that our rights we're born with, and government does not grant those rights. On the other hand, almost every single other country in the world, particularly the quote-unquote democracies, a lot of the democracies that came out of after the Soviet Union fell and so forth, all of their constitutions are what are called positive rights. It says the government shall. And what that means is that government grants you your rights, that and whatever gang of thugs are in charge today decides what those rights will be.
Hillary Clinton announced that the U.S. would participate in what is now called the UN Small Arms Treaty. Now, this is being pushed by a great number of tin can dictatorships, socialist states, and basically police states around the world as the way to control small arms trafficking. And Hillary Clinton agreed that the U.S. would be involved, obviously with the blessing of the White House.
So basically what this is it's an international treaty agreement that is going to limit the individual rights of gun owners in America. And now, correct me if I'm wrong here, a treaty has to be ratified by Congress, am I right?
There's no doubt. It takes 67 votes to ratify a treaty in the United States Senate, and that's going to be a tall order even for this White House.
The founders set up this beautiful system where you have the three branches of the federal government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, all filled with power-hungry men and women set against each other, always struggling for more power and control against themselves so they can never get together and oppress the people. That's called the separation of powers. And so each branch checks the other. But there's also a separation of powers at the state level. If you didn't like the rules in New York, you could move to New Jersey. If you didn't like the rules in North Carolina, you could move to South Carolina. If you didn't like the rules in Alabama, you could move to Texas.
My hot button issue is the First Amendment. And that's the thing that really got me fired up to even get involved in the political process in the first place. The violation of my First Amendment rights. And the biggest violation of our First Amendment rights comes through hate crimes legislation, hate speech legislation that attempts to limit our ability to have a voice and an opinion in the open marketplace.
The only protections we've ever had have been the rights we claimed for ourselves. And if you look at the Revolutionary War, we had to say this is our right and this is what we'll tolerate and this is what we won't. Now, what caused the Revolutionary War was far less egregious than what they're doing to us now. I believe if we could roll the tape back to 200 years ago, our founding fathers would laugh at the debates we're having today. And they'd also cry at the idea that we're throwing it all in the trash.
They had just escaped tyranny. They had just escaped a government that had become far too powerful and had no regard for the rights of its citizens. And so when the Founding Fathers gave us the Second Amendment, you know, as many people like to say, the Second Amendment is there to make sure that the rest of the amendments, the rest of the Bill of Rights, is remembered.
We had two amendments, the 16th and the 17th, that were ratified that really destroyed the very fabric of state sovereignty. And this 16th Amendment being what most people understand as the income tax amendment. And the 17th is the one that changed senators from being elected as state representatives to actually being represented by the people.
As far as the 17th Amendment goes, the original intention of the Founding Fathers was for the senators to be appointed by the state legislature. This would allow for them to do a recall at any time. If the senators, say when they voted for the bailout, we could have immediately recalled them while the people were up in arms, where they were passionate about the issue. But what happens is this empowers central planning and strong central government, because now we have to wait for the next election cycle, and by then people have lost sight of what it was. They've lost distraction with our short-term attention spans now.
In our system of government, the states are to have the ultimate checkmate against executive abuse of power. Until we got the Federal Reserve Act and the 17th Amendment in 1913, the states appointed U.S. senators. The people elected the state legislators, and then they would send the U.S. senators to Congress. And so the states had full control over the Congress because they appointed the senators. When they began to elect the senators at large, the senators could now be taken away to Washington and bought off by special interest and by offshore banks and by the military-industrial complex. And that's when you see the real corruption setting in. It is the states that are above the federal government, because the states represent the body of the people, and those state legislatures represent the body of the people.
The same things came back through the environmental movement, and because they have used scare tactics, Chicken Little tactics, that the sky is falling, global warming, all of this, that if we don't do something about it, then the we're going to lose our planet Earth and we'll lose our home and it's all destruction on us. All those scare tactics have gotten people to take their liberties and throw them on the bonfire like a good old-fashioned book burning, all in the name of protecting the environment.
The federal government gets and grabs hold of most of the power that they have throughout our history through tragedies, or very traumatic times, in our nation's history. The latest, of course, being 9/11, and the overreaching, of some of the law enforcement powers that the federal government has come because of fear.
He was fired at, burned with cigarette butts, pierced with a nail in his right foot, and severely beaten with an electric baton. The wounds and bruise marks visible on his body is a testimony of the brutality he was subjected to by the Chinese authorities.
In Russia, they don't allow protest except for free speech zones. The United States has adopted that. In communist China, they only allow authorized demonstrations. We now have the same system here. And if you notice, our media doesn't criticize Russia's tyranny or China's oppression anymore, because they would look like hypocrites if they did. In the past, our government would criticize the North Vietnamese or the North Koreans or Fidel Castro for torturing people. Now, you don't hear them criticizing authoritarians and despots around the world, because our government is doing everything that dictators do, as if they're going down a checklist of every horrible thing that corrupt regimes do, and trying to even go further than tyrants have in the past.
George Bush was correct when he indicated that the Constitution is only a piece of paper. And if people do not know the ideas, if they don't read the Constitution, if those ideas are not protected and enforced, then the Constitution could theoretically be a perfect piece of paper with perfect ideas, and they would be irrelevant. If you want to know how much protection the Constitution gives you, I challenge you to stand on a railroad track with a train coming and hold up a copy of the Constitution as your protection. And you will discover in very short order that the Constitution will afford you essentially no protection whatsoever.
No, absolutely not. I will never take a mandatory vaccination. Ever, ever, ever.
Well, I might not know exactly what I do until that time comes, but I can tell you this, I wouldn't be taking the vaccine, and there might be shooting that day.
That's why there's 200 million guns in the United States. I mean, I've got, you know, we are the ones, I truly believe we are the ones as individuals who can make the best determinations for what's best for our families. No third party, no interest that has any other interest but your interest is going to be able to make those decisions on your behalf. And if you cede those decisions onto somebody else, then you are risking extermination ultimately. And so if that's the case, then I'm going to do what I need to do to protect my family.
Well, we don't know that. That's another big question and problem with the bigger question that we're discussing here, and that is the increased level of control by the federal government to dictate to citizens everything. It's incrementally that we go down the path. But when that time comes, the big question is, what's the state going to do? And so I finally decided and realized we needed a process in our state, and I think every state needs this, to be able to address that. So I've introduced another bill that will address that problem of how do legislators, how do the people quickly, efficiently react to unconstitutional acts that the federal government takes. We talked about putting teeth in the Constitution by funneling the federal tax dollars through the state, and then the state could pass it on. We also need a mechanism in which state legislators can easily bring a question before the House or the Senate, the legislature, address that issue that's unconstitutional, they believe is unconstitutional, and then be able to address it publicly, openly, and vote it up or down.
Again, I sincerely hope that our government has not gotten so corrupt that we have government agents in this country willing to come to my door armed, with the intention of incarcerating me and giving me some mandatory vaccination, because I will resist with every ounce of force that I am capable of generating, which is considerable. My very first question during my presidential campaign was relative to the anthrax scare that was prevalent at the time. And the question was, Mr. Badnarik, what is your position on mandatory vaccinations? And because I was a very new candidate, I hadn't learned how to couch my answers diplomatically. As an engineer, under moments of stress, I still blurted out the truth. And my answer to the question was, you bring the syringe, I'll bring my .45, and we'll see who makes a bigger hole.
Well, the Second Amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and that leaves them with the authority and the power to be the last say-so in fighting off tyrannical government. And the one thing that the Democrats and the liberals and a lot of people make a mistake about is that the first part of the Second Amendment, where it says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, some people think that the reference to militia is talking about the Army or the National Guard. Well, there's two things wrong with that. The National Guard wasn't formed until 100 years later, and the Founding Fathers didn't even like the idea of a standing army. So they certainly weren't guaranteeing the right of soldiers to keep and bear arms.
The discussion, they say, well, they never envisioned machine guns, and yet they did have weapons that were capable of firing multiple rounds at once. Back then, they were experimental, but they did exist. They knew about them. Personally, I think it's one of those balance issues, that if a person can engage their target.
Well, the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't specify what type of arms, and it doesn't specify pistols, shotguns, rifles, assault rifles, whatever. It says arms. So I think what you just described there, the fact that a populace should be able to defend itself from their government, if necessary, includes the right to have any sort of weapon that the federal government or any government has.
I draw my line in the sand when I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I can feel it and see it, taste it, that my rights are being violated. That's when I take a stand.
Would you be willing to be force vaccinated?
No.
Then would you be willing to go to a quarantine camp?
No.
What do you plan to do if they come knocking on your door?
Well, you know, you bring your syringe, I'll bring my 40.
Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for electing me to another term as sheriff. I want you to know that I appreciate it, and that I will continue to do my best to make this city and, well, to make this county a place where we can be proud to raise our children.
The most powerful public servant in the county, who is the sheriff. The sheriff can kick the feds out of their county. The sheriff is the most powerful individual. But instead, they've been taught that they have no power. And in many states, they're getting rid of the sheriff or turning the sheriff into a creature of the state or a creature of the city. Cities are chartered by the state under the rules of the state and the county. So again, it's backwards.
That the sheriffs in this country really take their job seriously in protecting and serving the people of their county. And yes, the best protection you can give your people, Sheriff, is protection from tyrants. And my question is, Sheriff, will you stand against tyranny? If you won't, then you're not doing your job.
You can move out in the middle of the desert and get together with a couple hundred of your friends and found a city. You could hire your own police. You can go set up speed traps out on the highway and pull over unsuspecting families that are out there, you know, driving by as tourists. But the minute you start violating the county laws and the state laws, you are involved in criminal activity. The cities are simply incorporations. And so they are trying to overthrow the sheriffs. They are trying to overthrow the legislatures through these agreements they're signing with the federal government and the United Nations.
We've always been swindled in one way or another. We just refuse to accept that it's happening again. You know, we get trusting. And, you know, between COINTELPRO, Project Megiddo, You know, this is just another example of it with the Obama White House.
A lot of people get confused. They think that communism is for the people. But if you study history in depth, you will learn that big central banks and powerful robber barons actually funded communism as a way to con the people back into serfdom, back into slavery. And if you look at the Communist Manifesto and compare it to the laws that the Federal Reserve has lobbied to be passed in the United States and also in Europe, it's identical.
The 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, how many have already been implemented in this country? Like, for example, a graduated income tax, like our federal income tax, and others.
The Communist Manifesto was the concept of having what they call a state bank with massive capital, and that's of course the Federal Reserve System. It's not entirely a state bank because it's tied in very closely with the private banking system. You have really a cartel structure there. But it's a state bank in the sense that it's a product of statute. Obviously, the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. Those private bankers wouldn't have that authority if it weren't for that statute. Now, the other area that the Communist Manifesto, of course, was interested in was that it's developing now is this concept of all land was going to be owned by the state. Well, we're coming into that same type of relationship. The land is not all going to be owned by the state, but it's going to be owned by these huge agribusinesses, which are interlocked with the state, these huge agricultural corporations or cartels, which are interlocked with the state in the same way, in essence, that the Federal Reserve is interlocked with the state. So they have a lock over our food supply in the same way that the money people have a lock over our money and credit supply, right? And it's the same structure. What they learned was the communist system of centralized bureaucracy doesn't work. You need to have centralized bureaucracy interrelated, interleaved, if you will, with quote-unquote private enterprise.
Communism is an evil theory. It is evil at its inception because its overall purpose, its goal, is to eliminate private property and therefore eliminate your rights, including your right to life. Because if the government decides that you are taking up too much space or eating too much food or not complying with the government's demands, then you will simply be eliminated because you have no rights.
This is a very sophisticated, nuanced issue. The similarities between the Civil War in the 1860s between the North and the South and what's happening today with the Declaration of State Sovereignty. We have to be very careful. If you study the history of what happened then, this is on record, mainline history. The British came in and funded the South to begin breaking away from the North, knowing that it would create a protracted war that would weaken the entire system.
Whereas what we're talking about today in terms of these state rebellions, if you will, against federal usurpation is the same in essentially every state. Now, it may not be the same in the sense that the legislature of Massachusetts may not feel as threatened by national health care as the legislature of South Carolina does, but there are a heck of a lot of people in Massachusetts who feel threatened, and a heck of a lot of people in South Carolina who feel threatened. And eventually, if enough people in Massachusetts feel threatened, that legislature will change its tune.
The people in Washington are making decisions that benefit themselves. The American people are beginning to realize that, and we are undergoing a second American Revolution. We're undergoing another change in the way that people think.
Right now we have foreign offshore banks coming in, controlling the federal government to engage in all these oppressive and tyrannical operations against the states that has the states declaring their sovereignty and some threatening to secede, which will then provoke a national crisis, which is what the globalists want. Instead, we need the states to declare their sovereignty, but not secede, and point out that the federal government itself has already seceded to international control. It's not the states that are trying to secede, it's the states that are trying to get the federal government to follow the Bill of Rights and Constitution and not be a gang of traitors and crooks, a bunch of mercenaries working at the behest of offshore corporations.
By order of the Chief of Police, clear this area or you are subject to arrest. citizen and you shall be arrested for having freedom of speech and using the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The Constitution is a very dangerous concept. Do not dare try to invoke the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. This is no longer America. This is Walmart, United States of America.
For anybody that may not know what the symbol of Don't Tread on Me looks like, basically the most common symbol, the one that would most routinely be seen, is the one where you see a coiled up rattlesnake. And that coiled up rattlesnake is ready to strike, but the symbolism there is, you know, if you don't mess with me, I'm not going to mess with you.
Well, again, I think that when I think about that, Don't Tread on Me, I think about the flag, a revolutionary flag. I think about tyranny of government that hoisted on a people from a very long distance away. Again, that idea of government being close to the people.
I do this for my children. I do it for my kids. I honestly do. I don't do it for any other reason than for my kids. I would like to see them live in at least a little bit freer of a society than what we have right now.
You know, not being overly reactionary. Personally, I would like to see people just band together and say, no, we're not going to do this. And if push comes to shove, if they push you, do you allow them to push you or do you shove back?
It's up to us to fix the mess. Yes, we thought we could trust them, but it didn't get this bad overnight. It got this bad because the citizens, not everyone, but some citizens, were content to sit in their lazy boy chairs with the remote control, trusting that government will take care of them. And while that may have worked at some time, it never has worked very well through the long course of things. So I want to encourage everybody to do your part to take back America. It might be as simple as just giving a civics lesson to your friends, neighbors, and relatives, but when people hear the truth, they can recognize it. And there's no reason we have to throw away the principles that made us the greatest nation on earth.
We need to get organized on the local level, precincts. Organize in the precincts, organize so that you can turn out voters who believe your way is the main step in turning things around. During a presidential campaign, the 9 months before that is not the time to start trying to get enough people out to support your candidate.
It's important for citizens to get involved. Become a candidate for public office or find a candidate for public office that you support and get engaged in electing people who will express a devotion to a commitment to the clear principles of the United States Constitution.
I have never seen my constituents and people across Missouri so engaged, and I'm sure it's like that in all the states.
The most important people that you can elect that know and understand the Constitution and their responsibility to protect you is your county sheriff and your governor. If you can get those two people on board with protecting you from tyrants, we'll win this battle, and we'll keep this battle and these tea parties peaceful. If not, we're going to watch our country continue to die, and instead of throwing tea in the harbor, we're going to start throwing politicians.
That is in Article 1, Section 8 in the enumerated powers of the Constitution, and if the federal government says they're going to cut off highway funding, for example, for a state, then we should be well within our rights to say that, okay, well, we're going to cut you off then of all federal tax receipts until you release those funds that we have given you to fulfill your enumerated powers.
But the good people of America, through the Patriot Uprising, the Tea Party movement, have banded together and made it clear to our government that we just aren't taking anymore. We're not going to sit back and allow you to perpetrate these things against the American people. We are not going to allow you to just ignore this document called the U.S. Constitution, and it is the people of America, not the politicians, the people of America have stopped health control and tax and charade.
Founding Fathers created a country in which the local level is to be the most powerful force on us. If government is going to have any kind of effect on us, particularly it should come from the local level, because that means you can sit down with your local county commissioner, your local city councilman over a cup of coffee or something and say, you know, Harold, I got a problem with this, and you can talk to them. And if they don't do what you want them to do, then you can organize to try to take them out of office.
A larger than expected turnout today for a Tea Party protest. People are upset with the Obama administration. And this time, in addition to signs denouncing government spending, protesters were encouraged to bring their guns.
Well, I think there's a lot of people, myself included, until about a year ago, that basically just trusted our government and believed that they were actually doing what was best for us.
The protesters say the pending health care legislation is a big reason why they're upset. But they're also angry about gun control, big bailouts, and tax increases. They say it's time they're heard.
Well, I would call it sensitizing people to the problem. You have different levels here. There are some people who understand this problem, and then there are others who don't understand the specifics of it, but they know the source of it. And Congress, this problem is located in Congress. And then there's some down below who will understand not only that, but they say, well, I know a solution to it, or I know a direction for a solution. We have to work through the states or what have you. And then you have a vast mass way at the bottom who are feeling the economic and social screws being turned on them. And the one thing they know is they're not responsible for this. They didn't do this. Somebody else did it. And now they're looking around to see who it was. And it has to be people in positions of power that did it. And so they're looking at the financial community, they're looking at the big businessmen, they're looking at the big politicians and say, you people are responsible in some way for this mess that's coming on me, that's being dumped on me. Their first instinct is to ask them to correct it, because they've been told all along that Washington has all the answers, right? But now they're realizing Washington does not have the answers. We get hope, we get change, and we don't actually get any hope or change, right? That was the whole mantra of the Obama campaign. I leave Mr. Obama aside, right, without criticizing him in particular, but that's the idea of all of these political campaigns. You put in this new fellow and things will change. And people have swallowed that stuff long enough. They realize it isn't true. It doesn't change. At that point, they're going to stop, number one, looking to Washington, begin to look at the other alternatives, which are the states. And I hope the second point is they're going to recognize that if change is going to occur, they have to make it occur. That is, the individual person has to make it occur. He has to become directly involved in this. Self-government is not a spectator sport. It's a contact sport. You have to get on the field, put on the uniform, and go out there and play the game. And if that means working with an alternative currency and learning how to use it as a businessman, you have to do it. If that means becoming part of a militia unit so that you can deal with whatever the local emergencies are, you have to do it. Nancy Pelosi is not going to come down from Washington and do this for you.
I am sovereign. I have a right to life. I have right to freedom of speech, and I know that I have these rights. I don't ask anybody for permission. I do not look to some higher authority to determine whether or not I have these rights.
God made the people made the states, and the states made the federal government, and that's the way the power flows.
The people in this country, the average citizen, the guy sitting in front of a television set after having dinner at night, they know something's wrong. They can feel it in their gut. They know that there's something just not right with the world. As Morpheus said in The Matrix, he said, you know, it's the splinter in the corner of your mind. There's something there, they just can't put their finger on it. It's our responsibility as citizens, as people who uphold the Constitution, to give them the option, to give them the ability to take the red pill and see how far the rabbit hole goes. And when they do, when you start making people awake and aware of what's going on, they become excited themselves and become true grassroots people themselves and want to spread the message. And I think that's happening to great effect right now.
When you evaluate the efforts and the results of the Patriot Uprising, the Tea Party movement, and you ask yourselves, have we made measurable progress in reasonable time? The answer to that is a resounding yes. Absolutely. We are making major progress. Politicians are scared like they've never been scared before. And that is exactly where we want them. We want politicians to be in a constant state of fear, not physical fear, but fear of not being reelected, fear of the people holding their feet to the fire, fear of the people actually paying attention to and watching what they do. That's where we have the politicians right now.
The number one thing we can do to save our republic and restore our Constitution is to retake our Congress back for the people. Take it away from the establishment and the incumbents and give it back to the people.
How about local government?
Same thing, local government. We need to be electing local candidates that have a very clear and demonstrated understanding of their state constitutions, of the federal constitution. That way we know that those people are up to our business and not their own business.
But guess what? This is a government of the people.
As Tea Party protesters converged on the Capitol in Washington, D.C., stretching for several blocks from the West Lawn, hundreds of Rhode Islanders came out to the State House for a solidarity rally of their own. For those who couldn't make the national march, this was a chance to get up to the podium to voice their concerns over how the country is being run.
It is our responsibility to question our government and hold it accountable to us, the citizens.
The Tea Party, which stands for Taxed Enough Already, has been traveling across the country calling for smaller government and reduced taxes.
The political landscape in the United States today is backwards. You have the federal government declaring that it is the supreme arbiter of everything that happens in the 50 states, and that it removes the tax money from the states and then returns a small portion of it with strings attached. But if you study the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, how our nation is supposed to operate, you have this confederation of states that combine together to make decisions of national defense and monetary policy in the Congress. Instead, today, we have a private offshore banking cartel that seized control of the federal government and then used the federal government as a slave to carry out its unconstitutional aims upon the states. This is clearly in the 10th and 9th Amendment, that all the powers not expressly delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states or the people.
If we'll continue to support our sheriffs as they support us in defending us against tyrants from Washington, D.C., we can take our country back. It's taken courage to stand and keep your oath. Sheriffs, you took an oath to uphold and defend and obey the United States Constitution. When it matters most is now.
Politicians listen to one of two things: votes and money. And obviously people who are involved in this movement that are not a vested special interest and people that are, moneyed interests don't have a lot of money to buy off politicians. So what we've got to do is we've got to organize our vote. I've been working on multiple projects to do this, but at the end of the day, what we've got to do is we've got to educate people, get them awake and aware and informed.
Equating lawfulness and morality can be very dangerous. So I guess the time when you have to defend yourself from the government is when the law becomes lawless.
So what we're doing in Missouri is we're drawing the line in the sand and we're saying this is our territory, that is your territory. The Constitution says that this is our right. And unless we take back what was already given to us, we're not going to get any respect from them.
So be encouraged, be motivated, be engaged, and just have a part of this, because 30 years from now, somebody's going to ask you what you did during the Patriot Uprising. They're going to ask you what you did during the years of 2010, 11, and 12. And it's my prayer that you'll be able to say that you were right in the middle of it and that you had a piece of this fight.
The question is, where should the American people draw their line in the sand? First of all, as a Texan, I would like to point out this is a reference to the Alamo. Colonel William Travis recognized that the outcome was hopeless, and he told the men at the Alamo that he could not, in good conscience, order them to stay and fight. And so he formally dismissed everybody and told them they were now free to leave. They no longer had any responsibility to stay and fight. But he took his saber and drew a line in the sand. And he indicated that regardless of what they did, he, William Travis, was going to stay at the Alamo and, even if necessary, single-handedly defend the fort. The line in the sand has come to be your final straw, the last outcome. Much like survival, individual survival, that is a personal issue. You know, when someone crawls through the window at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, you can say, "Get out of my house," and they can continue walking towards you, and you can say, "Stop, I'm armed," and they can continue walking towards you. You can pull the gun out of the holster and point it at them and say, "Stop or I'll shoot." And if the person continues towards you, at some point in time, you have to decide whether or not to pull the trigger. You know, whether that is actually necessary for you to save your own life. And that decision is clearly a personal decision. Everybody has a different breaking point. Everybody has a different level of tolerance to frustration and tyranny.
Instead of sitting down and saying, wait a minute, what does the Constitution tell us? Security. Where do we find that word? Well, it's the only place the word security appears in the Constitution. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And the security of what? A police state? A free state. And the only other place where a word related to security is used is the word secure in the preamble, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So if you think that through, if you looked at the book of instructions, if you had the brain of a kindergarten student in terms of constitutional law, you'd look at this and say, aha, whatever kind of homeland security operation we want, its goal has got to be a free state and the blessings of liberty to our people. Oh, and by the way, the Constitution tells us what that is. It's called the well-regulated militia, and the reason we can be secure in knowing that the well-regulated militia will secure the security of a free state and the blessings of liberty is because it is composed of whom? The people themselves. Not an elite armed force, not a group of politicians, the people themselves. Now, I just did that in how long? 20 seconds? You didn't have to go to Harvard for 3 years of law school to figure that out. Right? It's right there on the face of the document.
It is my belief that liberty will be restored, that we will reestablish our constitutional republic in this country. And I sincerely hope that enough people have crossed that personal line in the sand where they will join forces with the rest of us so that a small number of us are not required to use force and use of arms.
By order of the City of Pittsburgh Chief Police, I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse. You must leave the immediate vicinity.
Don't tread on us. We're not afraid. You work for us. We're not your slaves. Don't tread on us. You crossed the line. Soon you will pay for all your crimes. Don't tread on us. We're not afraid. You work for us. We're not your slaves. Don't tread on us. You crossed the line.
Yeah, there's going to be basic principle. It would include everyone in principle from, let's say, 16 to 55 years of age. And then it would allow for anyone who was outside of those parameters, at least at the upper level, to volunteer for the system. And then it would give certain exemptions to people who were in public office, say judges or whatever, and certain people who were in private occupations where they had, let's say, hospital, all right, working in medical services. Then everyone would have to be armed and trained in different ways, and that's where you get into the one size doesn't fit all. because the training might depend upon local conditions. So if you're dealing, let's say, with Louisiana, we have the Mississippi River, New Orleans, the problems of levees and so forth and so on. Obviously, one important part of the Louisiana militia would be people being trained in some kind of service units, construction units or whatever, that would deal with that particular problem, keep their eye on that problem, apparently better than the U.S. Corps of Engineers has done, right? If you're living in other areas, you're going to have other problems to deal with. Now, the picture that comes to my mind now, let's take Virginia, for instance. Statute that I have in mind here would say is following. The state passes this militia revitalization bill, and it authorizes each one of the counties, or some of the larger cities, I mean, places like Richmond, to set up a militia committee of safety. And the purpose of this organization would be, at the county level, to be the governmental entity that oversees the operation of the militia. And it would consist of some number of the county supervisors, the chief law enforcement officer, the county, 4 or 5 of these elected officials or appointed officials would be in this group, plus the leaders of the militia units that were formed. And then we'd form militia units initially on the basis of what used to be called independent companies, because we don't want to scare people right away. So we let people simply volunteer into this. And if you don't want to volunteer into it, you pay some amount of money as an exemption. Pay $50 a year as an exemption. Then you don't have to perform. Otherwise, you volunteer. And what we want you to do in your independent company is to structure yourself on one of whatever, 20 different possibilities. You could be a medical services company, you could be a police company, you could be a building, construction company, whatever it is. And then we'll leave some blank spaces down there. If you come up with a better idea, fill it in. And then after you've organized yourselves this way, maybe you have 50 people or 60 people, whatever, you come to the County Committee of Safety. Here's our petition. We've done this. These are the people that are organized. Here's what we're going to do. Here's our training program. Here's the kind of equipment that we're going to get, we think we need. And we want you, the County Committee of Safety, to authorize this. County Committee of Safety signs on. This was actually done, not in Virginia, it was done in Rhode Island. Rhode Island was one of the examples of this happening all the time. When was this? In the colonial period, up to the constitutional period, and then thereafter as well. So through the independent company structure, we now find out the best way in each county to organize people. What kind of people do we need? How should we organize? How many do we need? How many do we need? How should they be organized? And we do this through essentially volunteers at this point, because we don't want necessarily to bring everybody, we don't need everybody right away to do this. And we don't want to alienate a lot of people who aren't ready to perform this function. And if they're willing to pay $25 to get out or $50 a year to get out, that's fine. Where does that money go? It goes to the militia group. So now the militia group has this money to buy equipment, to get to training facilities and what have you. And then we determine that the best way to organize a militia group or for the purposes in Warren County, Virginia, which is where we are now, is this way. And over in Clark County, it's different. And Fairfax County, it might be slightly different and what have you.
Based on the needs of the county.
It's based on the needs of that county. Now then, also on there's certain state considerations. Now, at the end of some period of time, let's say a year, you have the County Committee of Safety writes a report based on what they did, and they send this back to the State Committee of Safety. And the State Committee of Safety says, looks at that and says, aha, on the basis of this, we think we should amend this state statute to provide for this and this and this and this. And now that we have all this up, we're going to increase the exemption fee from $50 to $250. We're going to force more people into this. And we're going to tell those people that they have to take a Red Cross first aid. We're now going to start laying these things out, which everybody has to do. So that at some stage down the line, maybe it'll be 5 years, maybe 10 years down the line, this country is going to look, this state, let's just say the state of Virginia, if we're the only ones that did it, we're going to look as well prepared as Switzerland for any kind of emergency. We don't care what it is. Natural disaster, epidemic, economic collapse, attack by the Chinese, you name it, we're going to be as well prepared as we could be. We may not have nuclear weapons to retaliate, but otherwise we're going to be as well prepared at the state and local level as we could be. Food security, medical security, police security, we're going to have that. None of which we have now. I should say police security, we have some of that, but not at the right level, and they're depending too much on Washington in any event. We're going to have that in this state. It will be maybe different in Nebraska, maybe different in Massachusetts, California, what have you. But at some stage down the road, this country is going to be completely organized for any kind of problem that would arise. And it's going to be organized from the bottom up. not from the top down.
RestoreTheRepublic.net and TakeBackWashington.com are two key places to join the fight, the info war against the New World Order. You've seen the film. You understand the 10th Amendment, the difference between a republic and a democracy. Now get out there and get involved in organizations of like-minded Americans that understand the left-right paradigm is a fraud. And for more news and information, to track what the globalists are up to and how people are countering them worldwide, visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Thank you for watching Don't Tread on Me, Rise of the Republic. This film and other documentary films that are out there are vital to getting the word out to the people of the world to understand the type of global system that's being set up. That's why the establishment is moving to censor the internet and censor alternative press and films, because we are kicking their butts together. And this film goes a long way towards realizing that dream of liberty and freedom and a republic in our time. Great job to the filmmakers, and great job to all of you out there that are going to spread this film to four winds.